Under the glittering skyline of Hong Kong, one name hides behind almost every fortune ever made: Ho Sin Hung, the man who invented the Hang Seng Index and built the empire that became Hong Kong's second largest bank. His story is not one of privilege or inheritance, but of grit, genius, and an unshakable belief that even a boy born in poverty-stricken Macau could one day redefine Asian finance. Long before the stock tickers flashed his numbers across trading screens, he swept floors in a gold shop, studied old books on economics by candlelight, and memorized the patterns of human greed and fear. Those lessons would one day build the financial pulse of an entire city. But behind his remarkable success lies a paradox: 13 children, none willing to inherit his multi-billion-dollar empire. What kind of father builds Hong Kong's fortune, yet dies with a family unwilling to take his throne? From a barefoot child who could barely afford school to a 91-year-old tycoon who outsmarted Li Ka-shing in one final billion-dollar duel, Ho Sin Hang's life is a tale of brilliance shadowed by solitude. As the man who taught Hong Kong how to measure its wealth faced his final years, the question remained: how do you measure the worth of a man when his own family refuses his legacy? Long before he became the man who shaped Hong Kong's financial heartbeat, Ho Sin Hang was simply a boy from Macau, born into a family so poor that most nights ended with an empty stomach. His parents couldn't afford school fees, so at the age of 10, he was sent to Guangzhou, where he worked as a janitor in a small gold shop. His task was simple: sweep the floor, clean the counters, and collect the tiny flakes of gold dust that fell between the cracks. But even in those long, silent hours, Ho was watching, listening, and learning. He studied the rhythm of transactions, how buyers hesitated before agreeing on a price, and how the shopkeeper's tone could shift a deal from loss to profit. Without realizing it, he was teaching himself the language of business, a language built on trust, timing, and intuition. At night, when the shop closed and the city dimmed, he borrowed books left behind by customers, volumes on economics, law, and psychology. He couldn't afford a tutor, but he didn't need one. His curiosity became his teacher. People around him began calling him the boy who learns from air. In those humble years, his worldview was quietly forming. Wealth wasn't just money, it was knowledge, resilience, and the courage to start again when everything collapses. In his 20s, Ho earned a small promotion, moving from cleaning to assisting at the counter. It was there he met Lam Bing, a charismatic businessman who recognized his sharp instincts. Lam became both mentor and friend, showing Ho the mechanics of trade and finance, and the delicate balance between risk and responsibility. With Lam's encouragement, Ho began experimenting in small investments, dabbling in gold trading. But like many first ventures, his ambition outran his experience. One wrong speculation cost him everything. The loss was devastating, not just financially, but emotionally. He fell into debt, humiliated, and fled Guangzhou with nothing but a suitcase of old books. Most men would have disappeared after that. Ho didn't. Instead, he boarded a rickety ferry to Shanghai, where he sought out Lam Bing once again. When Lam saw him, exhausted, broke, and half-starved, he didn't turn him away. "You've lost your gold," Lam told him, "but you still have your mind. That's harder to replace." Those words reignited Ho's determination. Over the next few years, he rebuilt himself, studying financial systems, foreign currency, and international trade. The pain of failure became his foundation. He learned that humiliation can be the best education, and when opportunity finally came, he was ready. What began as a desperate journey to survive would soon evolve into the creation of a financial empire, one that would carry his name into every trading floor in Asia. By the early 1930s, Ho Sin Hang had regained his confidence. He was no longer the boy sweeping gold dust from the floor. He was a man who understood its value. With the lessons of his early failure burned into his memory, Ho gathered enough savings and decided to open his own currency exchange and gold trading business in Guangzhou's Upper and Lower Nine district, one of the city's busiest commercial streets. His timing was both perfect and dangerous. The global economy was shifting, currencies were unstable, and gold, unpredictable as ever, became both a refuge and a trap for those who dared to play its game. Ho's intuition served him well at first. His small exchange quickly attracted customers, and profits began to flow in. He was bold, often betting on market swings that others feared. But boldness can blur into arrogance, and soon, Ho's calculations collided with the chaos of global economics. A sudden downturn struck the market, and the price of gold plummeted overnight. Ho found himself overextended, unable to cover his clients' trades. In the gold markets of that era, traders who failed to deliver were required to post their names publicly, a scarlet mark of shame. Seeing his name nailed to the board outside the exchange shattered him. His empire, built from borrowed hope, collapsed in a single week. Creditors hounded him, employees fled, and his reputation, so carefully built, was gone. It was the kind of fall that ends most men, but Ho refused to vanish. Instead, he took the humiliation as his turning point. With nothing left to lose, he traveled to Shanghai, clutching the only thing that hadn't betrayed him, his knowledge. There, he was welcomed once again by Lam Bing, who by then had become a successful financier with deep roots in Shanghai's gold trade. Lam didn't mock or lecture him. Instead, he gave Ho a place to stay and, more importantly, a second chance. Ho repaid him not with excuses, but with action. He studied Shanghai's dynamic markets, watching how international traders managed risk and moved capital across borders. He began to see gold not just as a commodity, but as a mirror of human behavior, fear when it rose, greed when it fell. In Shanghai, he also learned the power of partnership. He understood that survival wasn't just about intelligence, but about trust and alliances. That realization became the cornerstone of his next chapter. By 1933, armed with humility and hard-won experience, Ho returned to Hong Kong, the British colony whose financial future was still unwritten. Together with Lam Bing and several friends, he founded a small financial firm in Wing Lok Street, Central. It was modest, a few desks, a ledger, and a shared dream. That firm would soon evolve into something that would outlast every crisis and every generation. It would become Hang Seng Bank, a name that would define Hong Kong's rise as the financial capital of Asia. In 1933, when Ho Sin Hung, Lam Bing, and a handful of partners opened their modest financial office on Wing Lok Street in central Hong Kong, few could have imagined that this cramped room would one day house the roots of one of Asia's most influential banks. The name they chose, Hang Seng, meaning ever-growing, reflected more than optimism. It embodied Ho's personal philosophy that real success is built on continuity, integrity, and human connection. At the time, Hong Kong's financial world was dominated by British institutions that catered almost exclusively to foreign merchants. Local traders, especially Chinese businessmen, were often turned away or charged high rates simply because of who they were. Ho saw an opportunity hidden in this injustice. He envisioned a bank that treated small Chinese entrepreneurs with respect, giving them the financial tools and trust they had long been denied. From the very beginning, Hang Seng Bank operated differently. Ho personally met customers, greeted them by name, and remembered their stories. He instructed his clerks never to rush a client or argue, no matter how small the transaction. A bank doesn't own its customers, it earns them, he would often remind his staff. To him, banking was not just about numbers, it was about people. Through the Second World War, when chaos swept through Asia, Ho's foresight and calm judgment saved the young bank. As Hong Kong fell under Japanese occupation, Ho quietly shifted a portion of the bank's reserves to Macau, which remained neutral territory. This move, made with almost prophetic timing, kept Hang Seng alive when other financial institutions crumbled. When peace returned in 1945, Ho was one of the few who had both capital and credibility intact. In the post-war years, Hong Kong exploded into a hub of opportunity. Refugees from mainland China poured into the city, bringing both desperation and ambition. Ho recognized that these people, dismissed by others as poor migrants, were in fact the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. He redesigned Hang Seng's approach to banking to suit them: fast loans, flexible terms, and simple requirements. To many families, Hang Seng became not just a bank, but a bridge to a new life. Ho's philosophy extended to his employees as well. He valued loyalty above credentials and humility above arrogance. If you can remember a client's name, you can also remember your own beginnings, he told them. That ethos created a culture of respect that defined the bank's reputation across generations. As Hong Kong's trade and real estate markets surged, Ho expanded Hang Seng's operations. By the late 1950s, it had branches across Kowloon and the New Territories, and had become the largest locally owned Chinese bank in the colony. But Ho was never content with size alone. He wanted to modernize the way Hong Kong understood finance. In 1960, he led Hang Seng through a major transformation, converting it into a public company with registered capital of HK 30 million, a bold step that marked its evolution from a family-style operation to a true financial institution. When the Hang Seng building rose in Central, it symbolized not only the bank's growth, but the rise of a new era, one where Chinese entrepreneurs finally stood shoulder to shoulder with the colonial elite. Ho would often stand by the windows of his office overlooking Victoria Harbour, watching the ships come and go. Each vessel represented the heartbeat of Hong Kong, and each loan, each deposit, each handshake inside Hang Seng added another pulse to that rhythm. He had built more than a bank. He had built trust, the rarest currency of all. By the mid-1960s, Hong Kong had become one of the most dynamic financial centers in Asia, and Hang Seng Bank stood at the heart of it all. Under Ho Sin Hang's steady leadership, the once modest institution had become a trusted pillar for both ordinary citizens and powerful entrepreneurs. But just as the city's skyline climbed higher, the dangers beneath the surface began to rumble. In 1965, a wave of panic swept through Hong Kong's banking sector. Rumors spread that several small local banks were insolvent. Within hours, lines of anxious depositors formed outside bank doors, desperate to withdraw their savings. Fear, as Ho understood well, could destroy a century of trust in a single afternoon. When the crisis reached Hang Seng Bank, Ho was 78 years old. He could have walked away. Instead, he spent days inside the head office, personally addressing customers, urging them to remain calm. But panic had a power of its own. Within 72 hours, the situation became critical. The only way to save the bank and protect thousands of depositors was to sell a majority stake to a stronger institution. On April 12, 1965, with trembling hands but clear mind, Ho signed the agreement that transferred 51% of Hang Seng Bank to the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, HSBC. For outsiders, it looked like defeat. For Ho, it was survival. "If Hang Seng survives, I have already won," he reportedly told his board that night. When the sale was announced, many employees expected him to retire. Instead, he arrived at the office the next morning, as usual, and thanked everyone for their loyalty. He ensured that no staff would be dismissed and that clients would retain full access to their funds. To him, a true leader wasn't the one who avoided crisis. It was the one who walked through it with integrity. In the years following the takeover, Hang Seng Bank not only survived, it flourished. With HSBC's backing, it expanded across Asia, while Ho remained as chairman emeritus, guiding policy from behind the scenes. But even amid success, he refused to become complacent. He knew that Hong Kong needed something more, a way to measure its growth, its confidence, and its future. In 1969, that idea became reality. Ho and his team introduced the Hang Seng Index, a revolutionary financial indicator designed to track the performance of Hong Kong's largest companies. It was simple, scientific, and instantly transformative. The index became the city's economic pulse, the number that traders, investors, and politicians watched to gauge the health of the market. For Ho, it was more than data. It was the embodiment of everything he had learned, that the flow of money reflected the flow of human emotion. The boy who once swept gold dust from a shop floor had created the tool that measured the wealth of an entire city. But as Hong Kong celebrated, Ho's personal life was quietly entering its most complicated chapter yet, one that no index could ever quantify. The 1965 banking crisis had left deep marks on Ho Sin Hang, not because it cost him control of his bank, but because it tested the very ideals he had built it on. To the world, Hang Seng's sale to HSBC was seen as a humiliating surrender, a powerful local bank swallowed by a British giant. Yet, to those who knew Ho, it was a quiet act of sacrifice. He had saved his employees, his depositors, and the trust of a frightened city at the expense of his own power. When reporters pressed him on how it felt to lose control of his life's work, he simply smiled and said, "If the bank still serves the people, then it was never mine to lose." True to his word, Ho didn't fade away. He stayed on as chairman emeritus, maintaining an office in the same building he had founded decades earlier. He walked the floors, greeted tellers by name, and kept his daily routine unchanged. But behind that calm facade, he was already plotting the next chapter. To him, survival wasn't enough. He wanted to prove that his instincts still outmatched Hong Kong's new generation of tycoons. That chance came in the early 1990s when a fierce business battle erupted over Heng Chiang Company, one of Hong Kong's largest trading firms. The contenders were titans, Li Ka-shing, Cheng Yu-tung, and the now 91-year-old Ho Sin Hang. To everyone's astonishment, Ho, the elder statesman, didn't just join the race, he won. Through a brilliant combination of timing, share splitting, and private acquisitions, he reclaimed control of the company for a staggering HK $7.5 billion. Even in old age, he outmaneuvered the city's richest men. The victory, however, carried a quiet irony. By then, Ho's wealth was estimated at well over HK $100 billion, but his family life had fractured beyond repair. He had 13 children, yet not one wanted to inherit his empire. They had grown up distant from his work, some abroad, others alienated by his strict discipline and emotional reserve. Ho had built his businesses on trust and empathy for others, yet he had never managed to extend that same warmth to his own bloodline. When asked about succession, Ho brushed it off. "They have their own lives," he said. "What I leave behind should help the city, not just my name." But in private, friends recalled his loneliness. His wife had passed away, and the grand home in Kowloon Tong that once echoed with children's laughter was now silent. To outsiders, Ho was still the man who had triumphed against the odds, the visionary who survived wars, markets, and crises. But those who knew him saw a more fragile truth, that behind the legacy of Hang Seng Bank and the Hang Seng Index was a man who had measured everything except the cost of his own success. By the time Ho Sin Hang reached his 90s, most of his peers had long retired, their names confined to history books and memorial plaques. But Ho was not like other men. His mind remained razor sharp, and his instinct for opportunity was as dangerous as ever. To him, business wasn't about greed, it was a battlefield, a way of testing one's intelligence against the unpredictable rhythm of the world. And in that final act of his extraordinary life, he would prove once again that even age couldn't dull his edge. The stage was set in 1991 when whispers spread through Hong Kong's financial circles that Hang Seng Company, one of the city's most powerful conglomerates, might be up for acquisition. Rivals moved quickly. Among them was Li Ka-shing, already hailed as Hong Kong's richest man, and Cheng Yu-tung, head of the New World Group. To many, these two represented the unstoppable force of a new generation, younger, faster, and armed with global capital. Yet when Ho Sin Hang, at 91 years old, entered the bidding war, the entire industry laughed. "He's too old," they said. "He can't possibly keep up." They were wrong. Ho didn't just join the game, he rewrote its rules. Using a series of strategic buybacks and corporate splits, he maneuvered behind the scenes, quietly reclaiming controlling interest in Hang Seng for a price that stunned the market, HK $7.5 billion. It wasn't just a business win, it was poetic justice. The man who had once been forced to sell Hang Seng now stood triumphant, having beaten both Li and Cheng in the final duel of his career. But when the dust settled, Ho's victory felt strangely hollow. His longtime associates celebrated, yet his home remained empty. The fortune he had built, a dynasty of wealth, power, and influence, had no heir waiting to inherit it. His 13 children, scattered across the world, had little interest in returning to the empire their father built brick by brick. For the public, the story was inspiring, an aging genius proving he still had the brilliance to outthink the best. But for Ho, the triumph was quieter, tinged with the melancholy of a man who had mastered every equation except the one that defined family. The billion-dollar duel was his last great victory, but it also marked the beginning of his final chapter, one where legacy would no longer be measured in money, but in meaning. As Ho Sin Hang entered the twilight of his life, the man who once calculated the movements of gold and markets began to think in quieter terms, not about numbers, but about permanence. He had outlived most of his rivals, survived wars, depressions, and corporate takeovers, yet what haunted him most was not loss, but emptiness. His empire stood vast, from Hang Seng Bank to Hang Seng Company, with assets worth billions, but the people meant to inherit it had already drifted away. His 13 children, each shaped by their father's brilliance and distance, had chosen separate lives abroad. None wished to manage his business, and none wanted his money. So, Ho did what few billionaires have ever done. He gave it all back. In the 1970s, he began funneling vast portions of his wealth into education and medicine, establishing scholarships, research centers, and schools across Hong Kong and Guangzhou. He founded the Ho Foundation, built the Ho Sin Hang Education Center, and helped create the Hang Seng School of Commerce, an institution that would train future generations of financial professionals. By the time he reached his 90s, he had donated more than $1 billion to hospitals, universities, and scientific research, quietly rewriting what it meant to be rich in Hong Kong. His philosophy was simple: money builds walls, education builds bridges. It was as if he had come full circle, from the child who couldn't afford tuition to the benefactor funding thousands of students he would never meet. In 1997, as the city he helped define prepared to return to Chinese rule, Ho Sin Hang passed away at the age of 97. There were no heirs fighting for his empire, no dramatic court battles over inheritance. His businesses continued, his name engraved on buildings and scholarships, but his wealth, like the gold dust he once swept as a boy, scattered into the world for others to use. And so, the man who invented the Hang Seng Index, who measured the rise and fall of nations, left behind one final paradox, that the true value of a life cannot be counted in dollars, nor in the hands that refuse to hold them. In the story of Ho Sin Hung, Hong Kong finds more than just the blueprint of its financial rise. It finds a mirror. His journey from a poor boy in Macau to the architect of the Hang Seng Index is the kind of tale cities are built upon, where intelligence, grit, and timing can turn survival into greatness. Yet behind every victory, there was a silence. The silence of dinners eaten alone, of phone calls never returned, of children who learned to live without their father's shadow. He proved that one man could change the heartbeat of an entire economy, but he also showed how power isolates, how success can be a prison gilded in gold. When he died, no one fought for his empire, and perhaps that was the truest reflection of who he was, a man who built everything with his hands, and yet learned too late that legacy cannot be engineered. Today, the Hang Seng Index still ticks across trading screens, its numbers rising and falling like the pulse of a living city. But behind those digits lies the echo of one question: what is the worth of wealth if it outlives the warmth of the people who could have shared it? In the end, Ho Sin Hang didn't leave behind heirs or dynasties. He left behind lessons that greatness measured only by fortune will always end in silence, and that sometimes the richest man in the room is also the loneliest one.